We gamed out what we thought would be the three most likely scenarios that they would face. We flagged a hurricane, we flagged a cyber attack, and we flagged a pandemic.
Welcome to our third episode of Let's Break It Down, where we go behind the scenes at the White House to reveal how campaign events are planned, choreographed, and executed to prevent things from going terribly wrong. I'm Alyssa Mastromonaco, former White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Barack Obama. Joining me today is Chris Liu, former White House Cabinet Secretary, Deputy Secretary of Labor, and Director of Transition after the 2008 election. I've known Chris since he was the Legislative Director for then-Senator Barack Obama. Chris Liu, welcome to Let's Break It Down. Thank you for being here today. It is so good to see you.
Alyssa, we've been in the trenches for a long time together, so it's great to be on here with you.
I mean, for like 15 years at this point.
It feels like for 15 years.
I know!
We were much younger back in the day.
Okay, so Chris, knowing what you know, being an expert, if you will, looking at the transition thus far, what major actions are delayed or have been delayed because of the Trump administration's denial of the election outcome?
Let's just do a little bit of concept. Back in 2008, there were 77 days between Election Day and Inauguration Day. This year, there are 78. And mind you, you work backwards. At noon on January 20th, 4,000 political appointees leave. Basically, the entire senior leadership of the U.S. government leaves, the most powerful, largest organization in the world. You would not do this in any private sector company or university, whatever. But we do it. But you also have to understand in 77 days to prepare to take over the U.S. government is no easy task. It's one of the reasons you start early, but it's also the reason why every single day matters. So if you lose days, those are days when you're not interviewing and vetting potential nominees. Those are days when you're not inside the federal agencies trying to understand the policies and the budgets. It's days when, most importantly, security clearances aren't happening, which means you can't put people into the national security agencies. Those are days when you're not having, communications with the outgoing administration about whatever, homeland security risk or national security risk you're trying to cover. And again, it's hard to quantify what that means, except to say that 11 weeks isn't enough time. And if you cut that down by 3 weeks, which is what happened here, that's going to have an impact. Hard to say what that impact is. But I think given the challenges that the country faces right now around the pandemic, around the economic recession, you would want as much time as possible.
I remember very clearly in my office, the small office, not the bigger office, when you came to see me, I think it was like July of 2012.
Yeah.
And you and I started, it might have been June, and you and I started talking about preparing the Romney transition. Now, people don't really talk about this. Yes, we were the sitting president. And Barack Obama, I'm sure you had this conversation with him as many times as I did. He said, we will never do any less than the Bush team did for us. We will do more. We will try to do even more than they did because the transition of power is so important. And so you and I started talking about making sure all the binders, when you transition, most departments pass binders on to their to the incoming administration so they understand what certain templates, what documents, what decision memos look like, what different kinds of I didn't know how you order a military aircraft. I found out in my transition binder. And so you and I made sure that across the campus, everyone had their binders updated, and we worked with the Romney folks to get ready, working with some of them on their clearances because, as a reminder to everyone, Benghazi happened in September of 2012. And so our national security team wanted to make sure that the Romney folks had clearance to be able to get updates, much like President Bush made sure that both us and John McCain were able to get the briefings on the financial crisis at the same time. So knowing all that, I left onto much greener pastures in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And you ran the transition for Trump, the Obama administration lead for the transition for 2016, which ultimately ended up being Trump. Can you give folks all the color, how did you prepare? What did you hand over to them? How did they respond? Tell us all.
So let's start in 2012. I mean, first of all, this is one of the more uncomfortable projects you will ever take on, because, you know, notwithstanding, you know, our boss had made this commitment that he was going to be as cooperative with his successor, whether that was after 4 years or as 8 years, as his predecessor was to him. So he had made that commitment. He believed in it. He tasked us with that. But again, it's this horribly uncomfortable thing because, you know, we're trying to win an election at this time. And yet we also understand that you have to put that partisanship aside and focus on continuity of operations and what's good for the country. So you're right. We sat down with all of the federal agencies, or the major ones. I remember we brought them into one of the big rooms in EEOB and had this conversation, made sure they had their binders together. And we were ready. And obviously we didn't want to have a transition, but we were ready in case we did. Fast forward to 2016, I was the Deputy Secretary of Labor. And so I was managing our transition on the way out. This time you knew you were going to leave, but you were hoping you were going to hand the reins to somebody who was from your own party. But obviously that didn't work out. But we had all the binders ready. We had, you know, the room that they could work in. We had computers. We had a whole set of briefings that we were going to suggest that they do. And Election Day happens. Obviously the result is not what we wanted. There's a lot of, you know, understandable grief among the political appointees, but we're ready to do the handoff. And we wait and we wait and we wait and nothing happens. And it's funny because when we ran the transition in 2008, I made sure, Election Day is a Tuesday, I made sure that we had people in the federal agencies, certainly by the following Monday, 6 days later, but in many cases by that Friday. So 3 days later, we had people in. I don't remember when the Trump people actually showed up at the Department of Labor. I think it was like the Friday or Monday. It was probably like the Monday of Thanksgiving week, and one person showed up. It wasn't 10 people. It wasn't 20 people. It was one person, very nice person. We had a nice conversation. I gave him a bunch of binders. I suggested he do these briefings. He said, sure. And then he did some of them. He brought a couple more people in. They did some more. But it wasn't kind of the organized thing that you would hope would happen when you're taking over a federal agency. And when you look across the whole government, this was happening across the place, and it's subsequently been written about. But obviously, they had Chris Christie planning their transition before Election Day. The day after Election Day, Chris Christie was fired. All of the materials that he and his team had put together were thrown away, and they started all over again. Now, we started this by saying, even in an optimal world, 77 days isn't enough to plan a transition. And it's certainly not enough when you start the day after Election Day. And I think in many ways, the chaos, the dysfunction of the Trump administration, certainly over the first year, can be traced back to the fact that they just both didn't expect to win, and once they won, didn't think through clearly how to do this handover, this takeover.
Because it goes to show that, like, governing is actually really hard and really important. And it's almost like when they had Chris Christie run transition, it was like, let's give Chris Christie something to do. Like, they didn't totally understand that he probably was in their orbit one of the best people to have been running the transition for them. Another, just to your story, we talked about this a little bit before, but one of my favorite Trump transition stories can be found in Susan Rice's book, where she talks about meeting with the national security staff, incoming Michael Flynn and his deputies. And of all the questions, Chris, that I know I brought to my transition meetings, they asked her if she had ever considered working in shifts with her staff, because this whole idea of being on 24/7 seemed unnecessary to them. They're like, there must be a better way. And she was like, oh my God. And then Michael Flynn tried to hug her. Just imagine that whole thing in your head.
Can I tell you, though, I mean, again, this is why these things matter. In January of 2009, we did a tabletop exercise with the outgoing Bush administration to walk through potential things that would come up. In 2017, and again, now this has been written about, we did a tabletop exercise with the Trump people the 1 week before Inauguration Day, where we gamed out what we thought would be the three most likely scenarios that they would face in terms of a Homeland Security thing. We flagged a hurricane, we flagged a cyber attack, and we flagged a pandemic. And I remember sitting there in one of those big rooms in EEOB where we used to do these tabletops, And one of the most awkward meetings I've ever been in, where they had the outgoing cabinet person sitting next to the incoming cabinet person around the table. So I was the deputy secretary of labor. Tom Perez was tied up. So I'm sitting with Mnuchin on one side of me, and the person they originally nominated for labor, Andy Puzder. And you're looking around the room, and it literally is, it's Scott Pruitt, it's Wilbur Ross, it's Elaine Chao. And there, sitting there, is Susan Rice next to Mike Flynn. One of the most searing visuals was over in the Justice Department corner. It was Jeff Sessions, Sally Yates, and Jim Comey sitting right next to each other. And you're like, boy, it's quite a thing to see. I don't know if it was Josh Earnest sitting next to Sean Spicer. It was like it was one of the most uncomfortable meetings I've ever been in.
Oh my God. And the thing is, we had such rules, mostly because you and I were assholes, but it's like, I wish that we had we had okayed more photo taking in the West Wing. We did not allow like personal picture taking. We were like, no, but you hear some of this stuff and I'm like, fuck, I wish I had a picture. Pete Souza can't be everywhere. Okay, so here is something that I know people know very little about, and Trump has really sort of butchered people's understanding of this specific group of people. Career employees.
Yeah.
Career employees are who Donald Trump has vilified as the deep state, in quotes, deep state, meaning that in some way, shape, or form, he was trying to tell America, or at least his supporters, that career employees were trying to have like a coup d'etat. Can you explain who career folks are and why they matter to the peaceful transition of government?
I mean, this offends me to my core. My father was a career federal employee at the Defense Department. I have 3 aunts and uncles who worked at the federal government. What Donald Trump calls the deep state are 2 million career civil servants who ensure that you get your Social Security check, you get your veterans benefits, that the air that you breathe is clean, that the food you eat is inspected, that we're not attacked by people overseas. It is the people that enforce our laws. I mean, I tell people you literally cannot walk from your house to your curb, and I can tell you 10 different ways that the federal government affects your life. Again, we can stipulate whether government's too big, too small. We can have that argument. But these are people who are underappreciated, who are not well paid by and large. I mean, they have a lot of other benefits, generally not well paid, and labor under challenging work conditions to provide service to the American people. Now, of course, we want it to be better, and we, that's something we should strive for. But these are not the enemy. And when they're standing up to Donald Trump, often at considerable personal cost to themselves, they're doing it because, like all of us, they swear an oath to the Constitution. The oath is not to the President of the United States. It's not to a political party. It is the Constitution. And they're standing up to protect the laws of our country. And in many ways, I think the lesson we've learned from the last 4 years is that a lot of the guardrails of democracy haven't held up particularly well. Certainly, the Republicans in the Congress have not been a check on this president. The press has done its job, but as importantly, it's federal civil servants. And I think about all of the people that came forward during impeachment who were then subsequently fired or demoted or moved to other jobs. Those are all federal employees who saw something that bothered them to the core and risked their jobs in order to protect the laws of our country.
And not just their jobs, in so many cases, their pensions, their retirement. And also, these are people who, when we were in office, our career employees, our career public servants had served both Bushes, the Clintons. Sometimes they had been around as long as Carter or Reagan. I mean, these are people who truly put country over party in every single way. And so hopefully not too many of them have fled, and the Biden folks can restore those seats of people who might have left.
But the problem, though, is that a lot of them have left. I mean, we know that in the Foreign Service, because it is so difficult trying to defend this president's foreign policy aims. A lot of the senior diplomats have left. We know that there's been this big exodus of climate scientists from EPA and Interior and Agriculture. And, that kind of expertise is not easy to replace. And so you're right. It's going to be important for the Biden people to figure out how can we replenish the federal service quickly.
Chris Liu, thank you for joining me on Let's Break It Down. This was so much fun.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again. I mean, it's like, and to think that was 12 years ago. That has gone by fast.
I know. Well, look, happy holidays, and we will do this again soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon to talk about the presidential inauguration.